Welcome back to Top 5. In the quiet town of Eldritch Hollow, there stood an old, dilapidated house at the end of a forgotten road. Locals whispered about it, claiming it was cursed. The last family that lived there vanished without a trace, leaving only shadows and echoes of laughter behind. Intrigued by the legends, a group of 4 adventurous friends, Sarah, Mike, Jess, and Tom, decided to explore the haunted mansion one chilly October evening, hoping to document their experience for their growing YouTube channel. As they approached the house, the wind howled like a wounded animal, sending chills down their spines. The old wooden door creaked open at their touch, revealing a dark and dusty hallway. Armed with flashlights and bravado, they stepped inside, feeling an unshakable sense of dread wash over them. "Let's split up and meet back here in an hour," Mike suggested, his voice wavering slightly. They reluctantly agreed, each taking a different path through the eerie house. Mike and Jess headed towards the upstairs bedrooms, while Sarah and Tom ventured deeper into the basement. Sarah wandered into what used to be the living room, her flashlight flickering over faded wallpaper and broken furniture. The air was thick with dust, and the smell of mildew lingered. Suddenly, she caught a glimpse of something in the corner of her eye, a fleeting shadow darting past the window. Heart racing, she turned, but nothing was there. She took a deep breath and continued exploring, eventually discovering a large, ornate mirror covered in dust. Wiping it clean with her sleeve, she stared at her reflection, but her reflection didn't mirror her movements. Instead, it grinned back at her, eyes glinting with malevolence. Panic surged through her, and she stumbled back, but it didn't stop there. The reflection reached out, fingers stretching through the glass, trying to grab her. Just then, she heard a scream echo through the house. It was Jess. Sarah bolted towards the sound, her heart pounding in her chest. She found Jess in the kitchen, pale and trembling. "What happened?" Sarah gasped, desperately searching for an explanation. "I saw something. It was like a man, but his face, it was wrong. It was all twisted." Jess stuttered, her eyes wide with terror. "Let's find the others," Sarah urged, but as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut, trapping them inside. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows deepened around them. Meanwhile, Tom and Mike had discovered a hidden staircase leading to the basement. The air grew colder as they descended, the flickering light casting grotesque shadows on the walls. They found old photographs lining the stairs, depicting the previous family in happy moments, but with one striking detail: the family members' faces were scratched out. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the darkness, and the basement door slammed shut behind them. They were plunged into darkness, panic rising as they fumbled for their flashlights. "Did you hear that?" Tom whispered, his voice shaking. The sound of scratching echoed through the basement, growing louder and more frantic. Then, out of the shadows, a figure emerged, an emaciated man with hollow eyes and a sinister smile. "You shouldn't have come here," he rasped, his voice echoing with the weight of despair. "Who are you?" Mike demanded, stepping forward, but the figure merely laughed, a sound that chilled them to the bone. "Just a friend," he replied, his grin widening. "But you're not ready to meet my family." Back in the kitchen, Sarah and Jess were frantically trying to pry the door open when they heard whispers growing louder, surrounding them. The whispers turned into screams, each one more desperate than the last, resonating with the pain of the house's tragic past. Suddenly, a mirror on the wall shattered, and shards flew towards them like daggers. They ducked and covered their heads, only to find that the broken pieces formed a swirling vortex of darkness. The whispers grew louder, pulling them toward the mirror. "Sarah!" Jess screamed, grabbing her arm. "We have to get out of here." But as they struggled against the force, the shadows twisted into faces, horrifying visages of those who had once lived in the house. They screamed in agony, their mouths moving but no sound escaping. The air thickened, suffocating them as they felt themselves being pulled into the vortex. Meanwhile, Tom and Mike were grappling with the figure, trying to push him back. With one final surge of adrenaline, Mike managed to shove the man into the wall, only to watch in horror as he melted into a puddle of darkness, leaving behind a charred photograph of the family with their faces intact. Realizing they needed to regroup, Mike and Tom dashed back upstairs, but as they reached the main floor, they found the kitchen empty. "Where's Sarah and Jess?" Mike shouted, panic rising in his throat. "Maybe they're in the living room," Tom suggested, and they ran toward the sound of faint whispers, now almost melodic. When they entered the living room, they were met with a horrifying sight. The mirror stood tall, and in its reflection, Sarah and Jess were trapped, their faces twisted in agony. The malevolent reflection grinned wider, eyes now glowing, as it reached out to them. "Help us," they cried, but their voices were drowned out by the laughter echoing through the house. Tom, in a moment of desperation, remembered the photograph. "We have to destroy the mirror," he yelled. They grabbed a heavy candlestick and smashed it against the glass. With a deafening shatter, the mirror exploded, releasing a wave of darkness that engulfed the room. The friends were thrown back, and when the dust settled, they found themselves back outside the house, panting and disoriented. The mansion loomed behind them, silent and still. Did we escape?" Sarah asked, trembling. And in that moment, Sarah, Mike, Jess, and Tom realized they were not just facing a haunted house, they had become part of an unending cycle, trapped in a nightmare that would repeat itself for eternity. The family that had once vanished was now the very essence of the horror that surrounded them, their faces twisted into expressions of malice. The air grew thick with anticipation as the family stepped closer, their eyes glowing with a preternatural light that held an unsettling familiarity. "Welcome back," the mother cooed, her voice dripping with a false sweetness. "We've missed you. What do you want from us?" Tom shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of dread. "Only what we've always wanted, companionship," the father replied, his grin widening as he gestured to the house behind him. "You see, this place is special. It thrives on fear, on the despair of those who enter. It needs souls, and you've come to fill that need." The friends exchanged panicked glances, realizing their earlier bravado had been foolish. They were now faced with a choice, to fight back or succumb to the darkness that enveloped them. "Let's get out of here," Sarah yelled, grabbing Jess's hand. They turned to run, but the door slammed shut behind them with a resonating thud, trapping them once again. The windows rattled as if protesting their desperate escape, and the air grew colder, wrapping around them like icy chains. "Running won't help you," the mother said, her voice echoing unnaturally in the confined space. "You're part of this house now. You can't escape your fate." The walls began to pulsate, and the friends felt a wave of nausea wash over them as the very fabric of reality seemed to warp. The room spun, and their surroundings morphed into a nightmarish landscape, a distorted version of the house they had just been in, filled with grotesque shadows and whispers that clawed at their sanity. "Stay together," Mike shouted, trying to rally their spirits despite the overwhelming terror. "We can fight this." As they pressed forward, the shadows around them began to take form, transforming into the twisted figures of the family that had once occupied the house. Their eyes were vacant, their mouths stretched in painful grins, and they moved with an unnatural fluidity, circling the friends like predators toying with their prey. "Join us," the youngest child, a pale figure with hollow cheeks, cried out. "It's fun here. We play forever." "No!" Jess screamed, shaking her head violently. "We're not going to be like you." In an instant, the spirits lunged at them, their icy fingers grasping for flesh. Sarah felt a cold hand wrap around her ankle, dragging her toward a shadowy pit that had opened beneath her. She screamed, fighting against the pull, but the darkness was relentless. "Help me," she cried, reaching out to her friends. Tom lunged forward, grabbing her wrists just in time, and with a surge of adrenaline, he pulled her back to safety. But as they regrouped, they realized that Mike was missing. "Where's Mike?" Tom shouted, panic rising in his voice. They turned to look, only to see Mike standing frozen, staring at the spirits with a look of longing. "Mike, come back." Sarah pleaded, but he didn't move. Instead, he began to walk towards them, his expression shifting to a serene smile that sent chills down their spines. "It's beautiful here," Mike said softly, his voice almost melodic. "You don't understand. It's a paradise. They'll take care of us." "No, Mike. Snap out of it," Jess shouted, rushing toward him. But as she reached for him, the spirits lashed out, pulling her back. "Join us, Mike," the father said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "You can be one of us. Forever. Don't let them take you." Tom yelled, his voice cracking. "Fight it." With every ounce of strength, Sarah reached out to Mike, her heart pounding as she grasped his arm. "Mike, you have to fight. Remember us. Remember who you are." For a moment, Mike's eyes flickered, confusion washing over his face as he hesitated. The spirits around him began to wail, their voices rising in a cacophony of despair, but they were drowned out by the strength of Sarah's voice. "Fight it, Mike. Come back to us." In that instant, Mike broke free from the spirit's grip, shaking his head violently as he stepped back from the edge of the darkness. What happened?" he gasped, suddenly aware of the horror surrounding them. "Let's go. Now!" Sarah shouted, pulling him toward the door, which remained stubbornly locked. The spirits shrieked in fury, their faces contorting into masks of rage. "Fleeing won't save you," the mother screeched, her voice rising to a fever pitch. "You're ours now." With no time to think, Tom remembered the candlestick they had used before. "We need to find something to break the hold of this place." They rushed through the darkened halls, desperately searching for anything that could aid their escape. As they passed the living room, Sarah caught a glimpse of the ornate mirror, the same one that had nearly trapped her before. "Wait! The mirror," she exclaimed, leading them back. "Maybe if we destroy it again, we can break the spell." The spirits howled in protest as they made their way back to the mirror, their dark forms swirling around them, trying to disorient the friends. "Hold on!" Tom shouted, gripping the candlestick tightly. "On 3. They counted together, their voices steadied despite the chaos around them. 1, 2, 3. Tom swung the candlestick with all his might, shattering the mirror into 1,000 glittering shards. The moment it broke, a blinding light erupted from within, pushing back the spirits and illuminating the room. The trapped souls of the family swirled around them, their expressions shifting from rage to relief as the darkness began to dissipate. "Thank you," they cried, their voices. With the mirror destroyed, the house began to tremble violently, the walls cracking and splintering as the spirits screamed in fury. The friends stumbled back as the very foundation of the house began to crumble. "Run!" Jess yelled, and they sprinted toward the door, the light from the shattered mirror illuminating their path. The house groaned, the shadows clawing at their heels as they raced to escape. Just as they reached the front door, it swung open, revealing the outside world bathed in moonlight. They leaped through the threshold, feeling a rush of wind as the malevolent force behind them shattered with a deafening roar. But as they turned back to look, they saw the house collapsing in on itself, the spirits caught in the chaos, wailing in despair. The darkness that had once engulfed Eldritch Hollow began to dissipate, leaving only silence in its wake. Panting and shaken, they stood outside, gazing at the ruins of the house. They were free, but the memory of the horrors they had experienced would haunt them forever. What just happened? Mike gasped, finally coming to terms with the reality of their escape. "I don't know," Sarah replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "But we made it. We're alive." As they stepped away from the ruins, an unsettling feeling washed over them. It was as if the very earth beneath their feet was still tinged with the remnants of darkness. "Do you think it's truly over?" Tom asked, looking back at the crumbling foundation of the house. Before anyone could answer, a chilling breeze swept through the air, carrying with it the faintest whispers of the spirits they had encountered. The friends froze, their hearts racing. "What was that?" Jess asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just the wind," Mike said, though his voice trembled. "Right?" But deep down, they all knew that the darkness had not been completely vanquished. It lingered, a shadow in the corners of their minds, waiting for the moment when it could creep back into their lives. As they walked away from the remnants of the house, a sense of dread settled over them. They were free for now, but the memories of the night haunted them, a reminder that some evils never truly die. And in the distance, as the moon cast an eerie glow over Eldritch Hollow, a new family approached the ruins, oblivious to the horrors that awaited them, drawn by the same curiosity that had lured the friends into the darkness. "Welcome home," whispered the wind, echoing through the empty halls, as the cycle began anew.